Hi, I'm Tori from Toriska Patterns. Welcome to the Holiday Sewing Summit. Today I'm going to teach you how to make this handy little tool roll. It's a nice way to organize your tools in a portable manner. It can be used for things like hammers, screwdrivers, pliers, but you can also use it for other applications as well. Bike tools, makeup brushes, knitting needles, and it's very easy to customize it to what you need. I made a version for myself for my knitting needles. So I made it a little taller and I used elastic instead of the webbing for the strap. And I also changed the top pocket to a flap. And I definitely will tell you how to do all of these modifications in the pattern. So as you can see, this tool roll can be used for all sorts of purposes. It can be used for men, for women, for crafters. It's a handy gift for anybody. So I hope you enjoy sewing it with me. All right, let's start with going over the materials that you will need. For your exterior, you will need some sort of sturdy fabric. I used waterproof canvas, vinyl. You can also use cotton canvas, waxed canvas, upholstery fabric. You want it to be sturdy. But if you really have your heart set on quilting cotton, you can use that. You'll just need to interface it. Those other thick fabrics don't need to be interfaced. For the lining, I generally use just a layer of quilting cotton, and I do interface it with woven fusible interfacing. You can see that for this I use, it's a different color, but it's the same fabric as the exterior. It's waterproof canvas, and I only need one layer for these pockets. But if you use quilting cotton, you will want to use 2 layers. So the amounts that you need for these, for the exterior, I only needed about half a yard of these 2 colors together, and half a yard of the lining. But if you choose to use quilting cotton for these, that increases how much you need. You need closer to a yard of lining if you use quilting cotton. I recommend that you have some clear vinyl. It's just a small amount of clear vinyl. The pattern has all the amounts that you need. If you don't want to use clear vinyl or don't have it, you can use more of the lining fabric. You will need a 14-inch zipper, which is about 36 centimeters. And your zipper can be any size. I recommend nylon zippers, but you can use a size 3, size 4.5, or size 5. You can also use zipper tape. That's what I'll be using when I videotape it. You will need webbing, about a yard and a half or 1.5 meters of webbing. And you'll need it for this handle and for these straps. Now I do have a variation where instead of using straps and buckles, you use elastic. So that is an option too. But for this version, you do need 2 buckles as well. And you will also need 22 inches or 56 centimeters of 1-inch elastic to help hold the tools in. And finally, you will need bias tape. You can either make your own, you can buy the store-bought bias tape. We'll also be binding the tops of these pockets, so you can use bias tape there as well if you don't want to cut out strips. If you don't want to use bias tape, you can also use twill tape. You could use the webbing itself on the outside. That's generally what the store-bought ones have on the outside. You can use a strip of waterproof canvas or vinyl, because those don't fray. They will not be cut on the bias, so you will get more wrinkles on the corners, but those are options as well. All right, I'm going to go over all these pieces, the individual pieces for the pattern. So your first piece is piece A. You'll need to cut your main body out of this. I'm using waterproof canvas for this version. And then my lining, which I've already interfaced this fabric with woven fusible interfacing. You will cut your lining on this dotted line. This also shows you placements of where you will be stitching your webbing and your buckles. Oops. And this is piece A. Pieces B and C, sorry, let me get these easier to see. Pieces B and C are the slip pockets. And if you are using a thick fabric, like I'm using waterproof canvas, and it's pretty sturdy, I just cut one, sorry, I bumped my camera. I only cut one layer of these. If you are using quilting cotton, you will need to cut two of each of these pieces, and one of them will need to be mirrored so that they can face each other. And you will want to interface those. On these pattern pieces, I have suggested stitching lines, but that definitely can be customized however you want. Then I do not have this written down. I do not have a pattern piece for this, but it is written down on the pattern that you will need either bias tape or strips of fabric to be used for the top of this. Now, this is fabric that has a diagonal pattern, so it looks like it's cut on the bias, but it's just cut. It's cut just on the grain. So I'm using a strip of that for the tops of these pockets. You can also use bias tape. For piece D, you should have a couple of pieces cut out from this. One is cut out from the lining, and then you have the same piece cut out from clear vinyl. And if you don't want to use clear vinyl, if you don't have any or if you don't want to use it, you can cut out, instead of the clear vinyl, 2 more pieces of this piece D, and I would cut them from the lining as well. So in that case, you would end up with 3 pieces that look like this. Now the pattern also has exactly how much you're supposed to cut for your webbing, your 3 pieces of webbing. So follow the instructions there of how much to cut. Your piece of 1-inch elastic. Your zipper, I'm using zipper tape that I've put a zipper pull onto, and I actually need to trim this to the correct length, but you need 14 inches for this, or 36 centimeters. My 2 buckles, and this bias tape that I made. I cut a 2-inch strip on the bias, folded it in half lengthwise, folded the edges in, and folded it again, and ironed it, and I made my own bias tape. And I have 78 inches of this. And this will be used later on. Like I said, you could also use webbing, twill tape, or a 1-inch long strip of vinyl or waterproof canvas instead. Those are both options as well. Also, if you don't like making bias tape, but you want to do a bias binding, you can cut the same length of a bias strip that's 2 inches wide, and don't iron it into bias tape, just leave it as a 2-inch wide strip. And I also have instructions on how to make it that way. All right, let's talk about some of the variations you can make with this pattern. This is the standard pattern. Let me turn it this way. It has an angled pocket and a straight pocket. This was an earlier version, so there's a bit of space here, but in the version we're making, the zipper goes all the way up to right here. And there's a vinyl pocket, and I've already mentioned you don't have to make the pocket out of vinyl. But I'm going to talk about a couple other options that you can do that I'm going to include brief instructions in the pattern on how you can do that. First, and I actually did all of these variations in this version. First, I adjusted the height, and for that, I took my piece A and I cut it, and I wanted it 1.5 inches taller so it would fit knitting needles. And so I cut it right here, and I did the same with this piece D, and I added 1.5 inches in the middle, and that's how I could get it taller, and so it could fit my knitting needles. This is the third variation of the pattern, but it's easiest to see here. Instead of buckles, I used 1-inch elastic, and I still did, this is a colorful webbing that I have. I still did that webbing for the handle, And instead of sewing down webbing and buckles, I folded my elastic in half. I sewed it in place here on the edge, and then later on it did the binding over it. And so that's how I did elastic instead of buckles. And I would only recommend this if you have lightweight things. If you try to use it with a lot of heavy tools, it probably won't be closed as much as you want it to close. The second variation, I'm going to turn this way. The second variation is to use a flap instead of having this top sewn down into pockets. So let me move these because these are really thick and it's making it hard to see. What I did is I folded in these sides of this top straight flap by 1/2 inch and sewed them down. And I used vinyl, so I didn't have to worry about the edges fraying. If you use quilting cotton, you can just sew the two pieces together, right sides together at the end, and then turn it right side out. I bound the top like normal in the pattern, and I basted it to the top edge, but not to the sides. Then I sewed it like normal and ended up with a very nice flap that can keep my knitting needles in. And when I close it and roll everything up, the knitting needles don't fall out. So that's another variation that you can use. And now we're ready to sew the pattern. All right, we're going to start by sewing the outside, and we're going to need to start with our 3 cut pieces of webbing. This one's 10 inches or 25 centimeters. These two are both 22 inches or 56 centimeters. And I'm going to take a lighter and I'm going to light the ends so that they won't fray later on or while I'm sewing. This doesn't work for cotton webbing, so if you do cotton webbing, you're just going to have to turn it under a stitch or something. All right, we're going to start with the shortest piece, and we're going to fold it in half lengthwise. And this is going to make the handle. And we're going to be sewing the center spot. We're going to start about 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters from each end. So, all right, I'll start at the beginning of this clip. And go between these 2 clips. So now I'm going to stitch just this center portion, and I'm going to stitch at the edge of my fabric, edge of my webbing, I mean. And I'll make sure to back stitch it. We are creating our handle. This will just make it a little easier to grab. If you want to make it heavier duty, you can wrap some fabric around it or another piece of webbing, but I'm just going to leave mine like this. Okay, I'm going to set aside these other pieces of webbing for the moment. I've got my piece A main body cut out, the exterior piece only. And when I put this webbing down, I'm going to need to sew it 6 inches or 15 centimeters from the end and 2.75 centimeters from the long edges, which is about 7 centimeters. Sorry, 2.5 inches, 7 centimeters. I'm trying to go back and forth between imperial and metric, and I'm keep messing up, but I do have it in the pattern, so if you get confused by something I say, check the written pattern. I don't know if you can see the marks I made because they're a dark colored pen, but I marked where I'm going to put these with my friction pens, which come off with little ironing. And I'm going to place the end of one side of the handle at one place and the other side of the handle on the other. You'll notice that it forms, it sticks up here because this is the handle. Now you can pin this in place. I've got pretty thin webbing, so I probably could pin it in place. I'm actually going to use a little trick that I use, and it's a great trick that bag makers use a lot. Double-sided tape. I'm just going to cut some double-sided tape, place it here on the end, on both ends. This is half-inch double-sided leather double-sided tape that I get from Wawak, W-A-W-A-K. It's one of my favorite places to get sewing notions. It's very heavy duty. And I'm going to use my guides that I put here. I know this is barely in the video. And put this in place on this side. Okay, and this will help it not move around while I sew it. I'm now going to sew a rectangle of about 1.5 inches in length. I have a button that I can press to keep the needle down on corners. I'm going to do that. And I generally sew to the sides forward, then put on my back stitch, and sew the other 2 sides using a back stitch. Now you can sew over this whole rectangle again, or you can sew an X. I definitely like to sew this particular seam a couple of times because it's going to get the most stress from the weight of the bag. And I will do the same thing on this side. This one I'll keep going straight this way. And then back stitch, and then front stitch, and back stitch. I'm going to call that good. Now it looks like I didn't use my lighter well enough right here because I'm getting some fraying right here. However, this edge will be covered up by my longer lengths, so I'm not going to worry about that fraying right now. I think I might have missed this side completely. It doesn't feel like it's been lit by the lighter. Okay, now we need our 2 longer lengths of webbing. Okay, mine fell on the floor, but I got them now. All right, I've got my buckle, both my buckles. I'm going to open them, and I'm going to set aside these sides with the prongs because we don't need those yet. I'm going to take the side with the buckle, and what you can do is just, we don't need this to be adjustable, so you can just wrap it around the bottom edge, or if you really want to, you can wrap it around this center post and under. You may or may not have an adjustable buckle that you got, and this side really doesn't need to be adjustable. So I think that okay, I'm going to just do it this way, and I'm going to measure that. That's about 2 inches. I would like it to be about 2 inches. Okay, and for now I'm just going to go like that to keep it the way I want it. Compare these and make sure I have the webbing the same length. It looks like I do. Okay, when we put these in place on the A piece, they are going to be 2.5 inches from this side edge. So you'll notice it'll cover up this end. And the fold right here will be 2 inches from this end. And then we are going to stitch an area of about 6 inches right here. We're going to stitch it down. So I don't have a flat enough surface here to get this all in place, but I'm going to use, once again, my double-sided tape. You can try using a glue stick, or you can just use pins, especially if your webbing is thinner, and you can put it into place. So I'm going to go do that off camera and then come back. Okay, I used my double-sided tape to keep this in place. I measured, these are 2.5 inches from the sides. Let me check, that's about 6.5 centimeters, and 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the end. And I'm measuring from this end right here of the fold. And then I'm going to sew down about 6 inches of this. Okay, so I'm going to start sewing. I can't go too close to the buckle or else I'll run into it. So I'm going to sew back and forth a couple times here, and then turn, and keep stitching. Oops. Stitch about 6 inches, so I'm going to stitch to here. Now, say that you do have cotton webbing, so you couldn't light the ends. This end will be covered up underneath this length of webbing. This end of the handle will be covered up, so the only one you really have to worry about is the loose end, and that one you can always fold under and sew. Just wanted to make sure to say that. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay. There's only one step left for this step, or for this exterior, and that is to finish the buckles. So I'm going to take my webbing and go up from below, and then down over that post. And so now I have my buckle. Oops. Up and down. Now I have my buckle. Now this next step that I'm going to show you can also be done at the end after you've filled up your tool roll with your tools and you see how long you need this webbing to be. You might find that this is just more length than you need, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what to do now, and then you can always do it later if you want, or you can do it now. So now that we've got this in, we're going to sew the end so that this webbing can't just slip out from the buckle. So I'm going to fold my webbing underneath about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to sew these tails down. We are now done with the exterior. So you can take your exterior and set it aside for now. Okay, we're now ready to sew the inside slip pockets. So you will need your piece A cut out for the lining that's cut out on this dotted line. You will need your piece B and piece C, which if you are using thinner fabric, you should have 2 pieces of these cut out mirrored. Same with piece C that's angled. So I'm going to take these paper pattern pieces and just move them to the side. Oh, and you also need either some bias tape or strips of fabric that should be 1 1/4 inches wide or 3.2 centimeters wide. These are not cut out in the bias. This might look like it because it's diagonal print, but these are not cut out in the bias. However, you can use bias tape as well. So if you are using quilting cotton and you have 2 pieces of each of these pockets, you're going to place them wrong side together and then treat it as 1 piece. So I only have 1 piece though, and I did. Oh, let me rewind a little bit. If you do have bias tape, at that point, with either 1 piece or 2 pieces, you put your bias tape along the top of the pocket, so not the side that has the curve, and you can just sew it on like that. But I did the strip method, and I'm going to show you how to do that with both pockets. So first I'm going to clip it. Well, you can clip it or just sew it. So I'll show you how it looks clipped, and then the next one I'm just going to sew it. These, if you cut them out as I suggested in the pattern by cutting out 45 inches and then cutting it in half, which ends up with 22.5 inches, you'll have a little bit extra in length for the tops of these pockets, but this one's angled, so it's going to be a little longer than the other one, which is 22 inches. So you'll have a little extra at the end, and that's okay. We'll cut that off later. So now I'm going to sew this. The pattern seam allowance is 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. Forgot to mention that these are sewn right sides together. Okay, so now you can use an iron to fold this upward and press it, or you can just finger press it. Turn your piece over so you can see it like this. I generally start in the middle when I do this. I take the top raw edge and I fold it down to meet the top of the fabric. Then I fold it over, and it should just cover the edge of your seam that you just sewed. So you can pin this or clip it. I'm going to clip it, and then I'm going to move to the other sides and clip the whole thing. We're now going to stitch this down. You can stitch either from the front or the back. If you are not very comfortable stitching binding, you might want to stitch from the back so that you can make sure you catch the edge of it. I generally stitch from the front. Whichever side I stitch from is going to be the one that is a little neater looking. And if you're afraid that you'll, and I'm pretty comfortable stitching binding like this, and I always catch the back. But if you're not comfortable that you're going to catch the back, sew it from the back. I'm going to sew it from the front. I'm going to edge stitch this, and I'm going to lengthen my stitch just a little bit. So this is my front, and I turn it over and I check the back, make sure that I caught all the edges, which I did. And now I'm done. I'm going to trim off these extra lengths though of binding. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other pocket, but I'm going to do that off video. I do want to point out that if you are doing the variation that I mentioned at the beginning with a flap at the top instead of another pocket, that this piece that's not angled would be the one that you would do that with. You would fold down these sides about 1/2 inch on each side and then go ahead and bind it. And if you're doing that, the way I treat the binding is I extend the binding beyond that edge, sew it down, and then fold it up, wrap this around, and then from the back we would do what I already gave instructions for, of folding this down to meet the top edge and then over, and then you have no raw edges on your end. So that is only if you are doing the flap variation instead of having a bottom pocket and a top pocket. Okay, I now have these two pockets, both of them bound at the top. And now I'm going to take my lining pieces and my lining A piece, and I'm going to put these into place here. So I'm just going to use clips or pins to pin it and put it in place. It should match up on both ends. And I'm going to keep clipping all the way around for both pockets. Okay, I now have both of the pockets clipped in place, and I'm going to lengthen my stitch and baste these down all the way around. I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. That'll definitely be covered up by our 1/2 inch bias tape later on. The last step for this segment is to sew on our elastic. Okay, I've got my elastic. It should be the same width as this piece. And I'm just going to pick a place right here in the middle to sew it. But of course, this side, it's angled, so it's not going to be directly in the middle over here. But I'm going to put it the same distance away from the pockets, the straight pocket on both sides. Okay. And I'm just going to sew this back and forth a few times just to have it secured nicely. And we are now done with this section, and we will be sewing the pocket next. We're now going to sew the zipper pocket. So you'll need this piece that you just sewed. You will need your piece D zipper pocket pieces, which should be 1 lining and 1 vinyl, or if you're not doing the vinyl, you should have 3 lining pieces. And you should have your zipper or zipper tape, which should be cut to 14 inches or 36 centimeters. So we're going to start with your first lining piece, this A piece, and the zipper. Now the zipper pull can go on either end, it doesn't matter. So we're going to place it, let me see if I can put this in a place where you can see. We're going to place the zipper pull facing downwards, or the zipper facing downwards towards this sewn A part. And we're going to match it up to this flat side edge. And then we're going to place this lining piece D together with it, and we're going to sandwich it together. So I'm going to do that now. I've got a little extra zipper here at the end, that's okay. I'll just trim that off. Okay, we will be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance with your zipper foot. Got to move the zipper pull out of the way so I can sew this part straight. Okay, I'm now going to keep the zipper facing in this direction, and I'm going to top stitch on this side of the zipper. So now for this next stage, we need to move this lining to the back. So that the second side of the zipper is on its own. Now, if you did 2 lining pieces instead of a vinyl piece, you are going to put your straight edges on either side of this zipper, sandwiching it in the middle between the right sides. But I've got a piece of vinyl, which has no right side, so I'm just going to pick, and I'm going to put it face together with the straight edge of the zipper. Now, sewing over vinyl can be tough for some sewing machines. My machine does okay, but some tips of things that you can do to make it easier are using tissue paper between the vinyl and your sewing machine when you sew. Or you can, my favorite is generally to use embroidery stabilizer. I have water-soluble stabilizer called Solvy, and I will cut strips of Solvy and put it between the vinyl. I use this not just for clear vinyl, but for other vinyl too. I'll put it between the vinyl and my sewing foot. But my zipper foot is kind of like a Teflon foot. It's fairly slidey on the bottom, so it should be okay. If not, I'll go pull out some of that stabilizer. And this is still 1/4 inch seam allowance. I tend to put, when I'm sewing vinyl like this, I put one hand behind to kind of pull while I'm sewing. That helps keep it moving consistently under my foot and with the feed dogs. But it does keep wanting to wrinkle up, so I'm pushing it with my finger too. And the stabilizer, tissue paper, or Kleenex can help prevent this issue. Okay. Now I am going to top stitch right here, and I still have this lining back here. So I'm just top stitching the vinyl and the zipper. I think I mentioned that I lengthened my stitch length. So now I can take this back piece and swing it around, and I'm going to match up these corners first and clip them into place, and then match up the other edges. And you will notice that instead of being flat like this, the zipper is like this, and it still works just fine that way. And now I am going to baste all the way around the outside. And now we are done with this step, and we're ready to move on to sewing everything together. Okay, now we are going to sew together the lining and the exterior that you should have set off to the side. And we're going to place them wrong sides together. And the side with the handle will be on the opposite side of the side with the pocket. So when we lay it out this way, the pocket is on one side, the handle's on the other. So what I'm going to do is go around all sides and use my clips to fasten these together, and then I can go and baste the edges together. So first I'm going to do the clips off camera, and then I'll come back and baste. Okay, I have placed these together, wrong sides together, and have clipped all around the edges. So now I am going to baste them together. I have them, I have my stitch length set to a longer stitch, and I'm going to baste over right over on top of the seams I've already used for basting. Okay, now that I have everything basted, it is time to make the marks for where you are going to have your stitching lines on the pockets. Now I already did this while I was clipping the two together so I could get that all done together. But I am going to use my suggested stitching lines on these pieces, and I've marked them with it might be hard for you to see, but it's a pen that it's a friction pen, and when it's exposed to heat, it goes away. So you want some sort of removable pen to mark it with, or chalk. When I was doing my knitting version, I made them closer together because the knitting needles don't need as much room. For this, I'm using a variety of widths, going from 3 inches to 2 inches for different sizes of tools. Okay, I'm doing a smaller stitch length for this than my basting stitch. And what I am doing is starting on one end, and I'm going to sew, and then when I get to these binding parts, I'm going to make sure to back stitch. Then I'm going to pick it up and stitch this way too. Now, the hardest places to avoid are the ones that are near your handle and your buckles, so I'm going to do my best to keep my buckles pulled away. If you're finding it hard to sew from this side, you can always take those markings, look where they are on the lining, and mark them on the exterior, and then just sew from this side just for the lines that are closest to the buckle. I'm going to see how I can do sewing like this though first. Oh, also, your stitching will be visible on the back, so make sure you are trying to stitch straight and that you are stitching with a color that you're okay showing on the back. Here, I'm going to make sure I back stitch across the binding. I'm going to sew carefully here because I'm close to the buckle. I was a little close here. My stitching went, So I'm probably going to take that out and restitch it from the other side, but I'm not going to do that at this moment. Next, I'm going to move my buckles out of the way and do the next stitching. Now, when I put these lines in place, I made sure that I'm not going to be sewing over the handle. The handle is on the back right here, so I'm sewing on either side. If you do change your stitch lines to a different place, make sure you keep in mind where the handle and the buckles are. For now, I'm not stitching down the elastic. I'm going to do that separately after we do all of these pockets. I'm also going to trim all these, trim the threads in a bit. And as I keep going to the next pocket, I'll just fold this and roll it. Okay, I'm also paying attention to where these straps are on the back. This one was already sewn down here, so I sewed right over it. But the next one, I don't want to sew over it, so I'm going to move these out of the way. Make sure that they're not going to get sewn over. I'm going to do this one from this side. Okay. I'm now going to trim all my extra threads. Okay, the last part of this, oops, one more thread, is to sew down the elastic. So I'm going to sew right here. You can see I've got my line here, my line here. So I'm going to sew directly in the middle. And I am going to switch to a zigzag, and I'm going to do a tight zigzag. Mine is at 1 inch length, 1.5 inch width. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch it and then stitch back over that. And I'm going to roll this side and for this one, I don't have to worry about the webbing straps, but I do need to worry about the handle, so I will make sure it's not in the way at all. So I do need to go back and fix all of those threads. But other than that, the stitching is complete. You can see it on the back too. The lines for the pockets, the zigzags for the elastic. But now, after I cut off all of the threads, all we have left is to do the binding around the edge. All that's left is the binding. So if you are using bias tape, cut your bias tape to, whether it's stuff that you made yourself or that you bought, cut it to 78 inches long or 198 centimeters. Or I mentioned a couple other things you can do. I can also do the same thing with a 1-inch wide strip of waterproof canvas. And this stuff doesn't really have any extra give if you cut it on the bias, so I just cut this as a normal strip. And I typically fold it in half so I get a little crease. And then just arrange it all the way around the edges. And you can see it'll have wrinkles at the corners. But you can do that. You can also, here's a spare piece of webbing. The professional tool rolls that you see at the stores, the ones that I've seen, have webbing around the edges, so it also has some wrinkles. You can also cut a bias strip and don't fold it into bias tape, but simply cut it as a 2-inch strip. Then you would follow the same instructions as when we did the top of the pockets, but instead of sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you would sew it with 3/8 inch seam allowance and then fold it over and bind it. So I made my own bias tape. And the first thing I'm going to do is sew the ends together. So before I do that, I need to make sure that I don't have it twisted at all. Okay. And I am going to sew the ends together. So that means opening it up, putting them at a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to sew diagonally from corner to corner. Oops, forgot to go back to my straight stitch, so let me do that real fast. And then sew corner to corner. Now before I trim this, I'm just going to double check that I did it without twisting. Okay, good. Now I am going to trim off this seam allowance, and then I'd like to get my, one thing you can do is you can press this open and then press the folds back in. But for now, I'm just going to fold it into place and just to put my clips on it to help keep the crease in. All right, the next thing, the important thing that I need to do for this, I recommend getting some pins for the bias tape. I'm going to stretch it out in the loop. I'm just going to pick one place that is going to be one of the corners. And then I'm going to fold this in half and mark the opposite end. You can also mark with a pen instead of a pin, but my fabric is so busy that I don't think I'd be able to find it again if I just marked it. So I'm going to use a pin. Then I'm going to match up my pins and then go to each end and mark. Oops, got my pin. Let me get it the same way. There, okay. I'm twisted again. Without it being twisted, I'm going to mark my end here. And my end on this side too. And now I have it marked in quarters. I am also going to find the center point of each of the sides of my roll. And I'm going to mark the middle of the end, the other end, and the long side, and this long side. So I'm going to go do that. Okay, so I marked it on the back side because I can see it easier on this gray fabric than on the red and black. So now I take my bias tape. I find one of those quarters and I'm going to match it with the center of one of my sides. I'm going to put it on either side so that the tool roll is sandwiched in the middle. So now I'm going to switch back to clips. And then my last side. I've marked this and I've clipped this into place. And now I am going to take this and I'm going to put the rest of the bias tape around the edge and clip it into place. So what I generally do is I start at one of the straight ends and I move towards the corner. And then go back to my straight end over here. Put a couple clips in place. Then I move back to this and I just work towards the corner. And this should fit nicely over the curve. But bias tape has a little bit of stretch because it's cut on the bias. So if you find yourself with excess fabric here, just kind of shift it around until it fits. The way that we're doing this, it will have some wrinkles. These are, even with it being bias tape. So I just clip over the wrinkle and we'll sew over the wrinkle. If you do it with the bias strips, sometimes that has a little bit less wrinkling, but just accept that there's going to be a little wrinkle on the corner. And then I'm going to do all of the 4 other edges too.
down an empty freeway. No waiting for the light to change.
We're now done clipping all around, and we're ready to sew the binding on. And for the binding step, you can sew from the outside or the inside. I generally sew from whatever side I want to look the nicest. So I'm going to sew from the back side. Okay, so I'm going to lengthen my stitch just a little bit, and I am going to edge stitch all the way around. And I just keep flattening the binding to try to make sure it stays in the right spot. And then I'm sewing both sides down at once. You can get a little hairy around the corners, so just sew carefully around the corners. Especially with the wrinkles, just sew right over them.
I'm seeing the sunrise behind me.
And when you're all done, you'll want to turn it around and make sure you got all the edges. And if there's any places where you missed, you can go over and restitch it. But it looks like I did pretty well. I don't see any spots that need to be restitched. And now you are done. If you did leave the stitching this part of the webbing for last, now is when you can fill this up with your tools and roll it up and see if your webbing's going to be too short or too long. I did have it cut to be a little long, and then it can be it can always be shortened rather than lengthened. See, it's kind of long, so I'll probably shorten mine a bit. So you are now done sewing your tool bag. I hope you enjoyed sewing this tool roll with me, and I'm sure there's somebody in your life that could use a handy organizer like this. Make sure to check out my website at toriska.com. Check out my patterns. I've got lots of sewing patterns for bags, but I have some other free patterns for things around your house as well, so make sure to check all those things out. Thanks.